George Martinez stood at the kitchen window of his modest apartment, watching snowflakes drift lazily past the streetlight outside. The calendar on the refrigerator behind him showed December 15th, and red circles marked the days leading up to Christmas. Each circle felt like a countdown to disappointment, a reminder of how tight money had become since the factory closed 3 months ago. His wife Catherine hummed softly in the living room, carefully arranging the few Christmas decorations they had managed to keep from better years. The small artificial tree sat in the corner, adorned with handmade ornaments their children had crafted in elementary school. Now those children were grown and scattered across the country, building their own lives and families. "The tree looks beautiful, honey," George called out, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her graying hair catching the warm light from the kitchen lamp. After 32 years of marriage, she could read his moods like a familiar book. "What's troubling you?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him at their small dining table. Her hands, weathered from years of working as a seamstress before arthritis forced her retirement, reached across to cover his calloused fingers. George sighed, pulling out the small stack of bills he'd been hiding in his jacket pocket. "The electric bill came today. And the heating oil company wants payment by Christmas Eve, or they'll shut off service." He spread the papers across the table like evidence of his failure. "I've been to every business in town, Catherine. Nobody's hiring. Not someone my age." Catherine studied the numbers quietly, her practiced eye calculating and recalculating possibilities. At 68, she had lived through lean times before, but never quite like this. The small savings account they'd managed to build over decades of careful living had been depleted during George's months of unemployment. "We still have each other," she said finally, squeezing his hand. "That's worth more than any Christmas present." George felt his throat tighten. Catherine had always been the optimist in their relationship, the one who found silver linings in storm clouds. But he could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes, the way she'd started checking and rechecking their small pantry, mentally calculating how to stretch their remaining groceries. "I wanted to give you something special this Christmas," he whispered. "After everything you've done, everything you've sacrificed. You deserve so much more than I can provide right now." Catherine stood and moved behind his chair, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders. Even after all these years, her touch could calm the storm inside him. "George Martinez, you listen to me. I married you for richer or poorer, remember? This is just a poor patch. We've weathered them before." But George knew this felt different. The manufacturing job he'd held for 27 years wasn't coming back. The plant had moved overseas, taking with it not just his livelihood but the livelihoods of hundreds of families in their small Ohio town. At 59, he was too old for most employers and too young for full retirement benefits. The next morning, George walked the familiar route through downtown, checking the same businesses he'd visited countless times before. The hardware store owner, Mr. Peterson, greeted him with sympathetic eyes and a slow shake of his head. The diner owner, Maria Santos, offered him a free cup of coffee and wished she had work to give him. "Keep checking back," Maria said as she refilled his cup. "Things might pick up after the holidays. Sometimes people need extra help with inventory and such." George nodded, though they both knew it was wishful thinking. He spent the afternoon at the public library, using their computers to fill out online applications for jobs in neighboring cities. The prospect of a long commute was daunting, but he'd do whatever it took to provide for Catherine. On his walk home, he passed Holbrook's jewelry store, the same place where he'd bought Catherine's engagement ring 33 years ago. The window display showcased elegant pieces that seemed to mock his empty wallet. He paused anyway, remembering how Catherine's eyes had lit up when she'd admired a simple pearl necklace in that very window last spring. "Just dreaming," she'd said when he'd caught her looking. "It's beautiful, but we have more important things to spend money on." More important things. Always more important things. When had they ever had the luxury of buying something simply because it brought joy? Mr. Holbrook emerged from his shop, keys in hand as he prepared to lock up for the evening. He'd known the Martinez family for decades, had sold George the rings for both his daughter's wedding and his son's engagement. "George. Good to see you." How's Catherine doing? She's well, thank you for asking. George gestured toward the window display. That pearl necklace she admired last spring, is it still available? Mr. Holbrook's expression softened with understanding. Small towns didn't keep many secrets, especially about plant closures and job losses. It is. Would you like to see it? George shook his head, embarrassed. I'm just looking. Maybe next year, when things turn around. George, Mr. Holbrook said gently, why don't you come inside for a minute? I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Curious despite himself, George followed the elderly jeweler into the warm shop. Mr. Holbrook moved slowly toward the back room, gesturing for George to follow. I'm not as young as I used to be, Mr. Holbrook began, settling into a chair behind his workbench. My grandson is supposed to take over the business eventually, but he's finishing college and won't be ready for another 2 years. I've been thinking about finding someone to help part-time, someone trustworthy who knows the community. George felt his heart skip. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity, Mr. Holbrook corrected. The pay wouldn't be much, especially at first. You'd need to learn about jewelry, about customer service in this particular business. But you're reliable, honest, and people in this town trust you. That matters more than experience sometimes. The relief that flooded through George was so intense he had to sit down. Mr. Holbrook, I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. The hours would be flexible, mostly afternoons and weekends when I need a break. And, George? The old man smiled. Employees get a significant discount on purchases. That night, George shared the news with Catherine over a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches. Her eyes filled with tears of relief and pride. I knew something would work out, she said. I had faith in you. George reached across the table and took her hands. I start training next week. It won't be much at first, but it's a beginning. And, Catherine? He paused, savoring the moment. I think I'll be able to get you something special for Christmas after all. Catherine laughed, wiping her eyes with her napkin. George Martinez, you already gave me something special 32 years ago when you said I do. Everything else is just bonus. But George was already planning. The pearl necklace would have to wait, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to show Catherine how much she meant to him this Christmas. The seed of an idea was beginning to form, something that wouldn't require much money but would require all the love he had to give. As they cleaned up dinner together, moving in the comfortable rhythm of 3 decades of shared meals, George felt lighter than he had in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, hope had returned to their small apartment. The Christmas lights Catherine had strung around the windows seemed to glow a little brighter, reflecting the renewed warmth in their hearts. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their town in pristine white. Inside, George Martinez began planning the most important gesture of his life, one that would remind his beloved wife that some gifts couldn't be measured in dollars but only in the depth of love behind them. The calendar still showed those red circles counting down to Christmas, but now they felt like promises instead of threats. George had work, Catherine had hope, and together they had something no economic downturn could take away, a love that had weathered every storm and would continue to shine long after this difficult season passed into memory. George's first week at Holbrook's jewelry store felt like attending school all over again. His large, work-worn hands trembled slightly as Mr. Holbrook taught him to handle delicate pieces worth more than he'd made in months at the factory. The old jeweler was patient, explaining the differences between various metals, the grading systems for gemstones, and the importance of building trust with customers who were often making significant emotional investments. Jewelry isn't just about precious metals and stones, Mr. Holbrook explained as they arranged a display case. It's about marking life's most important moments. Engagements, weddings, anniversaries, graduations. When someone walks into this shop, they're usually celebrating love or achievement. George nodded, thinking of his own wedding ring, a simple gold band that had never left his finger since Catherine placed it there. He understood the emotional weight these small objects could carry. By the end of his second week, George had helped a nervous young man choose an engagement ring and assisted an elderly woman in selecting a watch for her grandson's high school graduation. Each successful interaction boosted his confidence and reminded him why Mr. Holbrook had chosen him for this position. "You have something many experienced salespeople lack," Mr. Holbrook observed after George had spent nearly an hour helping the elderly woman make her decision. "Genuine empathy. You understand that these purchases matter deeply to people." Catherine noticed the change in George immediately. He came home each evening with stories about the customers he'd helped and the things he was learning. The defeated slump in his shoulders had disappeared, replaced by renewed purpose and dignity. "Tell me about the couple who came in today," Catherine said as they shared their evening tea, a nightly ritual they'd maintained even during the darkest days of unemployment. "Newlyweds, married just 6 months," George began, his eyes brightening. "They were looking for Christmas presents for each other, but they had a very small budget. The husband wanted to get his wife something meaningful, and she was trying to find a nice watch for him that wouldn't break the bank." Catherine smiled. "Did you help them find what they needed?" "Better than that. I remembered Mr. Holbrook mentioning some estate pieces in the back room, things that were beautiful but not selling because they weren't in the main display. I showed them a vintage pendant that had been cleaned and restored, and a classic men's watch that just needed a new band. Both pieces were marked down significantly." "And they were happy?" George's grin widened. "The wife started crying when she saw the pendant. Said it looked exactly like something her grandmother would have worn. Mr. Holbrook let me give them an additional discount since they were buying 2 pieces. They left holding hands and talking about how perfect their gifts would be." Catherine reached across the table and squeezed George's hand. "You're made for this work. You always could see what people really needed, not just what they thought they wanted." As December progressed, George's knowledge and confidence grew. Mr. Holbrook began trusting him with more complex tasks, including basic repairs and custom orders. George discovered he had steady hands and good eyes for detail, skills that translated well from his years of precision work at the factory. One afternoon, while Mr. Holbrook was at lunch, a familiar face entered the shop. Maria Santos, the diner owner who had offered George coffee during his job search, looked around nervously. "George. I didn't know you were working here now." "Started a few weeks ago," George replied warmly. "What brings you in today, Maria?" Maria glanced around, making sure they were alone. "It's my daughter Rosa's quinceañera next month. I've been saving for 2 years to buy her something special, something she can keep forever." She pulled out a small envelope thick with bills. "I don't know much about jewelry, but I want to get her a necklace or maybe earrings. Something appropriate for a young lady, but not too expensive." George felt the weight of responsibility. He knew Maria had struggled as a single mother, working long hours at the diner to support Rosa's education and dreams. This purchase represented sacrifice and love. "Let me show you some pieces that would be perfect for a quinceañera," George said gently. "We want something elegant but age-appropriate, something Rosa will treasure for years to come." He led Maria to a case containing delicate gold jewelry designed for younger women. There were simple chains with small pendants, modest stud earrings, and classic designs that wouldn't go out of style. "This necklace here," George said, pointing to a thin gold chain with a small heart pendant, "is popular with young ladies Rosa's age. The heart has a small diamond chip, so it's special but not too flashy." Maria examined the piece carefully, checking the price tag. George could see her calculating in her head, the same way Catherine did with their grocery budget. "It's beautiful, but it's more than I hoped to spend," she admitted. George remembered Mr. Holbrook's lessons about customer service and the employee discount he was entitled to. But more than that, he remembered being in Maria's position, wanting to give someone he loved something meaningful but being constrained by finances. "Maria, let me talk to Mr. Holbrook when he returns. You've been so kind to me and Catherine over the years, especially during these past difficult months. I think we might be able to work something out." When Mr. Holbrook returned, George explained the situation. The older man listened thoughtfully, then nodded. "Maria Santos is a good woman who's done right by this community for years," Mr. Holbrook said. And this is exactly the kind of sale I want you handling, George. Use your employee discount, and I'll cover half of that from my own pocket. A quinceañera should have something beautiful to mark the occasion. When George presented the adjusted price to Maria, her eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? This is too generous. Community takes care of community, George replied, echoing words Catherine had said to him many times. Rosa is going to love it. As Maria left with the carefully wrapped necklace, Mr. Holbrook observed George thoughtfully. You understand the real value of what we do here. It's not just about selling jewelry, it's about helping people celebrate what matters most to them. That evening, George shared the story with Catherine, who beamed with pride. You see? You were meant for this. You're not just learning to sell jewelry, you're learning to be part of people's most important moments. As Christmas approached, George found himself thinking more and more about the gesture he wanted to make for Catherine. The employee discount would help, but he wanted to do something that went beyond simply buying her a present. He wanted to create a moment that would capture everything she meant to him and everything they'd overcome together. One quiet afternoon, while polishing display cases, inspiration struck. George thought about the young couples who came into the shop, nervous and excited about engagements and weddings. He thought about the elderly customers choosing anniversary gifts after decades of marriage. And he thought about his own love story with Catherine, how they'd started with nothing but dreams and built a life together through every challenge. The idea that formed made his heart race with nervous excitement. It wouldn't require expensive jewelry or elaborate planning. It would require courage and vulnerability, the same qualities that had gotten him through his job loss and into this new chapter of their lives. George began making quiet preparations, calling in favors from friends and spending his lunch breaks visiting certain locations around town. Mr. Holbrook noticed his employee's mysterious energy but wisely kept his questions to himself. Big plans for Christmas, the old jeweler asked one day as they prepared to close the shop. George smiled, thinking of Catherine at home, probably adding another handmade ornament to their modest tree. The biggest, he replied. I'm going to remind my wife why she married me in the first place. Mr. Holbrook chuckled, locking the cash register. From what I've observed about you and Catherine over the years, I don't think she's forgotten. But it never hurts to make the reminder memorable. As George walked home through the early December darkness, Christmas lights twinkling in windows and snow crunching under his feet, he felt a deep sense of anticipation. The plan taking shape in his mind would require perfect timing and a little help from their community, but if he could pull it off, this Christmas would become a story they'd tell for the rest of their lives. Catherine was waiting for him with hot chocolate and her warm smile, the same smile that had sustained him through months of uncertainty. Soon, very soon, he would have the chance to show her just how much that smile meant to him. December 20th arrived with a bitter cold snap that left intricate frost patterns on the jewelry store windows. George arrived early, as had become his habit, to help Mr. Holbrook prepare for what would likely be their busiest day before Christmas. Last-minute shoppers would flood the store, desperate to find meaningful gifts with only days remaining. George, Mr. Holbrook called from the back room as George arranged the window display. Could you come here for a moment? George found his employer examining a small velvet box at his workbench. Inside lay a pair of simple pearl earrings, elegant in their understated beauty. These came in yesterday from an estate sale. The woman who owned them was about Catherine's age, and, according to her daughter, she wore them everywhere. They were her favorite pieces. Mr. Holbrook looked up at George meaningfully. They're beautiful, well-made, and reasonably priced. I thought they might interest you for Christmas. George picked up one of the earrings, noting how the pearl caught and reflected the light. They were exactly the kind of classic piece Catherine would love, sophisticated but not ostentatious. More importantly, they carried the story of another woman who had treasured them. They're perfect, George said quietly. But, Mr. Holbrook, I need to ask you a favor that goes beyond the employee discount. The old jeweler leaned back in his chair, curious. What did you have in mind? George took a deep breath and outlined the plan he'd been developing for weeks. As he spoke, Mr. Holbrook's weathered face broke into a wide grin. George Martinez, that's either the most romantic thing I've heard in 40 years of business, or the most terrifying. Are you sure you want to take that kind of risk? I'm sure, George replied without hesitation. Catherine deserves something extraordinary, something that tells her story as much as it tells ours. She's spent our entire marriage putting everyone else first. It's time someone made her the center of attention. Mr. Holbrook stood and shook George's hand firmly. Count me in. What do you need me to do? Over the next 2 days, George worked with quiet determination to coordinate his plan. He called Father Martinez at St. Mary's Catholic Church, where he and Catherine had been married. He visited the high school and spoke with the drama teacher about borrowing some simple equipment. He even stopped by the local radio station to speak with the DJ who hosted the morning show. Each conversation required him to explain his idea and ask for help. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, word began to spread quietly through the community. People who remembered George and Catherine's courtship, their wedding, and the years they'd spent contributing to local charities and community events, began volunteering their assistance. Catherine noticed George's increased energy and mysterious phone calls, but when she asked about them, he simply smiled and changed the subject. "You're up to something," she said on December 22 as they prepared for bed. "You have that same look you had when you were planning to propose." George kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender soap. "Just making sure this Christmas is special, that's all." Catherine studied his face in the lamplight. After 32 years of marriage, she could read his expressions like her favorite book. She saw nervousness there, but also excitement and deep love. "George Martinez, whatever you're planning, just remember that I don't need anything fancy. I just need you." "I know," he whispered against her hair. "But sometimes what we need and what we deserve are two different things." December 23 dawned clear and cold. George woke before his alarm, his stomach churning with nervous anticipation. Today would determine whether his plan was inspired or foolish. He dressed carefully in his best suit, the same one he wore to their children's weddings and other important occasions. Catherine was in the kitchen making coffee when he emerged from the bedroom. She took one look at his formal attire and raised an eyebrow. "Are we going somewhere special today?" "We are," George said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "I want to take you out for lunch, somewhere nice. It's been too long since we had a proper date." Catherine's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "A date? George Martinez, you romantic fool. Let me get dressed properly." As Catherine prepared for their outing, George made a series of quick phone calls, confirming that everyone was in position and ready. His hands shook slightly as he dialed the final number. "It's time," he said simply when Mr. Holbrook answered. "We'll be there at exactly 2 o'clock." Catherine emerged from the bedroom wearing her best dress, the navy blue one she'd worn to their son's graduation. She'd taken extra care with her makeup and hair, and George felt his breath catch. Even after all these years, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever known. "You look stunning," he said, offering her his arm. They walked to Maria's diner, where Maria had prepared a special lunch for them. The familiar restaurant was decorated with Christmas garlands and twinkling lights, and Maria had reserved their favorite corner booth. On the house, Maria insisted when George tried to pay. "After what you did for Rose's quinceanera necklace, this is the least I can do." As they ate, George found it hard to concentrate on conversation. His watch seemed to be moving too slowly, then too quickly. Catherine chatted about their Christmas plans, their children's upcoming visits, and the customers she'd noticed coming and going from the jewelry store. "You've really found your place there," she observed. "Mr. Holbrook was smart to hire you. You understand people in a way that makes them feel comfortable making important decisions." George nodded, barely hearing her words. In 30 minutes, he would either create a moment they'd treasure forever or embarrass himself spectacularly in front of half the town. At 1:45, George suggested they take a walk around the town square to enjoy the Christmas decorations. Catherine agreed, wrapping her arm through his as they strolled past the decorated storefronts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered square, and the air was crisp and clean. "George," Catherine said as they approached the center of the square, where a large Christmas tree stood surrounded by benches. There seemed to be an awful lot of people gathering here for a Thursday afternoon. George's heart began to race as he saw familiar faces positioning themselves around the square. Maria from the diner. Mr. Peterson from the hardware store. Father Martinez from their church. Rosa Santos with several of her friends from high school. Even some of Catherine's old customers from her seamstress days were there, cameras in hand. "George," Catherine said slowly, realization dawning in her voice, "what's happening?" George stopped in front of the Christmas tree and turned to face his wife. The crowd had grown larger, forming a loose circle around them but staying far enough back to give them space. Someone had set up a small speaker system, and gentle music began to play, the same song that had been their first dance at their wedding 33 years ago. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth as understanding flooded her features. "George, what are you doing?" George reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small microphone that crackled to life. His voice, amplified across the square, was shaky but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors," he began, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. 33 years ago, I stood in front of you all and promised to love, honor, and cherish the woman beside me. Today, I want to renew that promise and tell you all why Catherine Martinez is the most remarkable person I've ever known." Catherine stood frozen, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks as she realized the magnitude of what George was doing. Around the square, their friends and neighbors had pulled out phones and cameras, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. George's voice carried across the snow-covered town square as he spoke into the microphone, his words creating small puffs of vapor in the cold December air. Catherine stood before him, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized her husband was declaring his love for her in front of their entire community. "When I lost my job 3 months ago," George continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I thought I had failed as a husband and provider. I was ashamed that I couldn't give you the Christmas you deserved, that I couldn't buy you the beautiful things that would show everyone how much you mean to me." The crowd around them had grown larger as word spread through the small town. People emerged from shops and restaurants, drawn by the unusual gathering and the sound of George's amplified voice. Catherine's former customers stood with tears in their eyes, remembering the countless dresses she had altered, the wedding gown she had mended with loving care, the way she had always charged less than her work was worth because she understood the value of $1. "But Catherine taught me something during these difficult months," George went on, his eyes locked on his wife's face. "She reminded me that love isn't measured in the things we can buy. It's measured in the way we stand by each other when times are hard. It's measured in the way we choose each other, every single day, even when the world feels like it's falling apart." George reached into his other pocket and pulled out the small velvet box containing the pearl earrings Mr. Holbrook had shown him. He opened it slowly, showing Catherine the simple, elegant pieces that caught the late afternoon sunlight. These earrings belonged to another woman who was loved deeply by her husband for 67 years. When she passed away, her daughter said they represented a lifetime of small moments, daily choices to put love first. "I can't give you diamonds or gold right now, Catherine, but I can give you this promise." George handed the microphone to Father Martinez, who had quietly moved closer, and then did something that took Catherine's breath away. In front of their friends, neighbors, and half the town, George Martinez got down on one knee in the snow. "Catherine Maria Santos Martinez," he said, his voice now carrying without amplification as the crowd pressed closer to hear, "will you marry me again? Will you let me spend whatever years we have left showing you every single day that you are the greatest gift I've ever received?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children who had gathered with their parents stood perfectly still, sensing the profound nature of the moment. Catherine looked down at her husband, this man who had worked himself to exhaustion for their family, who had swallowed his pride to ask for help, who had learned an entirely new trade at 59 just to provide for them. "George Martinez," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square, "I married you 33 years ago because you were the kindest, most genuine man I'd ever met. I'll marry you again because you still are." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers as George stood and pulled Catherine into his arms. He placed the pearl earrings in her hands, then kissed her with the passion of a young man courting the love of his life. Around them, cameras flashed and phones recorded, but George and Catherine were lost in their own world, remembering their first kiss, their wedding day, and all the moments in between that had brought them to this snowy town square. "How did you arrange all this?" Catherine whispered against his ear as the applause continued. "It turns out our community loves a good love story," George replied, grinning. "Especially when it involves people who've been part of this town for as long as we have." Father Martinez approached with the microphone, beaming. "If I may," he announced to the crowd, "George and Catherine have asked me to perform a renewal of their wedding vows right here, right now, with all of you as witnesses." The crowd cheered again, and people began moving closer, forming a natural aisle between the couple and the Christmas tree. Maria Santos appeared with a handful of red roses from the diner's centerpieces, quickly fashioning a bouquet for Catherine. Someone else produced a small carpet runner, spreading it across the snow to create a makeshift aisle. As if by magic, the simple gathering transformed into an impromptu ceremony. The high school drama students, who George had contacted days earlier, emerged from behind the tree with garlands of evergreen and battery-powered lights, quickly creating an altar space. The local radio DJ, who had been secretly recording the entire event, announced over his portable speaker that they were broadcasting live to the entire county. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ's voice boomed across the square, "you're witnessing something extraordinary here in downtown Millers Creek. George and Catherine Martinez are about to renew their wedding vows after 33 years of marriage, and, I have to tell you, there's not a dry eye in this crowd." Catherine laughed through her tears as she looked around at their friends and neighbors, all of whom had dropped their evening plans to witness this unexpected celebration. Mrs. Patterson from the library was crying openly. The teenage checkout clerks from the grocery store were holding up their phones to capture every moment. Even gruff old Mr. Hanson from the gas station was smiling, his usual scowl replaced by genuine warmth. Father Martinez began the informal ceremony with a prayer of thanksgiving, acknowledging the challenges George and Catherine had faced and the strength they had found in their commitment to each other. He spoke about the nature of true love, the kind that deepens during difficult times rather than fading away. "George and Catherine," Father Martinez continued, "you've asked to renew the vows you made 33 years ago. But I think what we're really witnessing here is something even more profound. You're making new vows, vows informed by experience, by hardship, by the knowledge of what it truly means to love someone through everything life can throw at you." George took Catherine's hands in his, noting how they fit together perfectly despite the changes time had brought. Her rings, worn thin from years of wear, caught the Christmas lights that had begun to twinkle as evening approached. "Catherine," George said, speaking from his heart rather than from any script, "I promise to love you with the same excitement I felt on our wedding day, but with the deeper understanding of what that love really means. I promise to see you, really see you, not just as my wife but as the extraordinary woman you are. I promise to celebrate your dreams as much as I celebrate my own, and to remember that our partnership is the greatest success I'll ever achieve." Catherine wiped her eyes with her free hand before responding, her voice clear and strong despite her tears. "George, you've shown me what it means to grow old with someone who still sees me as beautiful, who still treats me like I'm worth pursuing. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes next, to believe in your dreams even when you doubt them yourself, and to remind you every day that you are the best man I know." They exchanged the pearl earrings for Catherine's wedding ring, which George removed and placed back on her finger with the same reverence he had shown 33 years earlier. The crowd watched in respectful silence as these two people who had weathered decades together chose each other again in front of the entire community. When Father Martinez pronounced them still married with a grin, the celebration that followed was spontaneous and joyful. Someone had contacted the local pizza place, which began delivering food to the square. The hardware store contributed hot chocolate and coffee. The bakery sent over Christmas cookies and cupcakes. What had begun as George's private gesture to Catherine had become a community celebration of love, commitment, and the power of standing by each other through difficult times. Children played in the snow while adults shared stories about George and Catherine's relationship, remembering their courtship, their wedding, and the countless ways they had contributed to their small town over the years. As the evening progressed and the party continued around them, George and Catherine found a quiet moment together on one of the benches near the Christmas tree. Catherine wore her new pearl earrings, which caught the colored lights and seemed to glow with their own inner warmth. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me," Catherine said, leaning against George's shoulder. "But, you know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "You reminded everyone here, including me, that love like ours still exists. Look around, George. How many of these couples are holding hands tonight because they saw what we have and remembered what they have too?" George looked out at their friends and neighbors, many of whom were indeed standing closer together, holding hands, sharing quiet conversations sparked by the renewal ceremony they had just witnessed. Maria Santos was dancing slowly with her teenage daughter Rosa, both of them laughing. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson were sharing a cup of hot chocolate, their heads bent together like young sweethearts. "I think," George said slowly, "this turned out to be even better than I planned." The local newspaper photographer had been capturing the entire event, and, later that week, the story would spread far beyond Miller's Creek. The photo of George on one knee in the snow, Catherine's face radiant with joy and surprise, would be shared thousands of times on social media. News stations from 3 states would pick up the story, and George and Catherine would receive letters and emails from couples around the world who were inspired by their public declaration of enduring love. But none of that mattered on this perfect December evening as they sat together in the town square, surrounded by the people who had watched their love story unfold over 3 decades. What mattered was the feeling of Catherine's hand in his, the sound of her laughter mixing with the Christmas carols someone had started singing, and the knowledge that after all these years, he could still surprise the woman he loved more than life itself. As the evening wound down and people began to head home to their own families and Christmas preparations, George and Catherine remained on the bench, reluctant to break the spell of this perfect moment. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Martinez?" George asked, standing and offering her his arm. "Ready, Mr. Martinez," she replied, standing and taking his arm. "Though I have to say, you're going to have a hard time topping this for our next anniversary." George laughed, already thinking about the years ahead and all the ways he would continue to show Catherine how much she meant to him. "Challenge accepted," he said. "I've got plenty of time to plan something even better." As they walked home through the snow-covered streets of Miller's Creek, passing houses decorated with Christmas lights and families gathering for their own celebrations, George and Catherine Martinez carried with them the warmth of a love that had been tested by time and hardship but had emerged stronger than ever. Their Christmas miracle hadn't been financial or material, it had been the reminder that true wealth is measured not in what you can buy, but in what you're willing to give of yourself to the person you love.